Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive.
Into AWS networking.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at some AWS architecture diagrams today
Okay.
that you provided us. And we're going to be talking about how to centralize access to your cloud resources.
Right.
So this is going to be fun. We're going to be talking about VPC endpoints.
Okay.
And we're going to be talking about AWS Transit Gateway.
Nice.
So let's just dive right in. What are VPC endpoints? What do they actually do for us in AWS?
So VPC endpoints, they're like these secure connections within your AWS environment that allow your resources, like your EC2 instances in your VPCs, to privately and securely access AWS services like S3 without ever having to go over the public internet.
So they're like a direct line to those AWS services without having to worry about all the security risks of going over the open internet.
Yeah, no more public IPs.
Okay, I like it.
No more NAT gateways. It's all nice and contained. So we've got these VPC endpoints. It sounds super useful for security.
Absolutely.
But, we're talking about centralizing things here.
Right.
So where does that come into play when we're talking about VPC endpoints?
Yeah, so that's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
Imagine you have multiple VPCs, right? Like different departments in your organization, each with their own little slice of the AWS cloud.
Okay.
Now, they all need access to these shared services like S3, maybe DynamoDB, whatever it might be.
Sure.
If you don't centralize how you manage these VPC endpoints, you end up with this kind of sprawling mess, right?
Yeah.
Each VPC needs its own set of endpoints.
Yeah.
It can become really difficult to manage and keep track of everything.
And from a security standpoint, that's a nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. You've got security policies sprinkled everywhere. It's not a good time.
So how do we wrangle this? How do we centralize this and make it manageable?
Okay, so that's where AWS Transit Gateway comes in.
Okay.
We're going to dive into that in just a second.
AWS Transit Gateway. All right, I'm intrigued.
It's a mouthful,
yeah,
but trust me, it's going to make your life so much easier.
All right, so I'm seeing this diagram here. Centralizing VPC endpoint access with AWS Transit Gateway.
Okay.
It looks pretty complex.
It's a good visual, though.
It does. It
helps to kind of wrap your head around it.
It does. So help me wrap my head around it.
Okay, so imagine this.
You've got these spoke VPCs.
Okay.
These are like your different departments, different environments, whatever they might be.
Right.
And then in the middle, you have AWS Transit Gateway.
Okay.
It's like the central hub, the grand central station of your network traffic.
I see. So everything goes through the Transit Gateway.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you have your shared services VPC. This is where all those important AWS services live. The S3, the DynamoDB, you name it.
So instead of every single spoke VPC needing a direct connection to each service,
right,
they all go through the Transit Gateway.
You got it.
That makes a lot more sense.
And that's the beauty of centralization.
So how does this actually work in practice? Like if I'm an application sitting here in Spoke VPCA,
okay,
and I need to talk to S3, walk me through the journey.
All right. So you're an application, you're hanging out in Spoke VPCA. You need some data from S3, right?
Yep. Got a craving for some data.
So you send out your request, but instead of going directly to S3, it hits the Transit Gateway first.
Okay.
The Transit Gateway, it's like this smart traffic cop. It looks at your request, sees you're destined for S3, and it knows exactly where to send you.
Okay.
It directs your traffic through the secure connection that never touches the public internet.
And it's all based on rules that we define.
Exactly.
You're in control.
Okay. I like where this is going.
It's like setting up the rules of the road, and the Transit Gateway makes sure everyone follows them.
So it's secure, it's efficient.
Absolutely.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, there's one thing that's still kind of bugging me.
Okay, what's that?
This diagram.
It shows us all these connections.
Right.
But it doesn't really tell us how our applications actually find these endpoints in the first place, right? Like, how do they even know where to send their requests?
You're hitting on a really crucial point.
It's like having a roadmap but no street names.
Exactly. You need a way to translate those IP addresses into something meaningful, something that our applications can understand.
So what's the missing piece of the puzzle?
We need to talk about DNS.
DNS.
Domain name system.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so imagine this. Instead of those complicated IP addresses, think of DNS as like a phone book for the cloud.
Okay.
It maps those user-friendly names like s3.amazonoz.com to those behind-the-scenes IP addresses that computers use.
So it's like when I type a website name into my browser, It
Exactly.
just takes care of all the complicated stuff in the background.
And in the context of VPC endpoints and Transit Gateway,
Uh-huh.
we're talking about a specific type of DNS called Amazon Route 53 Private Hosted Zones, or PHZs.
Okay, PHDs, so these are like internal phone books then for our VPCs.
You got it. Each VPC can have its own PHZ that stores the DNS records for all those private endpoints within that VPC.
So if I'm in Spoke VPCA and I need to access that S3 bucket,
Right.
my request goes through my VPC's PHZ,
Exactly.
which then points me to the correct endpoint.
And because we're using private hosted zones,
Yeah.
these DNS queries, they stay within our AWS environment.
Ah, so it's another layer of security on top of everything else.
You got it.
Uh-huh.
No DNS requests leaking out to the public internet.
I'm really liking how this whole centralized setup is shaping up.
It's all about creating that secure and controlled environment.
Absolutely, but let's not forget, not everything lives in the cloud, right? Some of us have on-premises servers, data centers, the real-world stuff.
Right, you're talking about hybrid environments.
Exactly. So how does our trusty Transit Gateway handle those?
Well, let's bring in our second diagram here.
Okay.
Accessing VPC endpoints from on-premises environments.
All right. I'm seeing our Spoke VPCs, shared services, VPC, Transit Gateway in the middle.
Right, all the usual suspects.
But now we've got this whole section for a corporate data center.
And that's where things get really interesting.
All right. So how do we connect that corporate data center to our AWS Wonderland?
We've got a couple of options, and they both involve our friend, the Transit Gateway.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
We can use AWS Direct Connect, which is like a dedicated private line between your on-premises data center and your AWS environment.
So super fast, super secure.
Exactly. It's ideal for high bandwidth, low latency connections.
Got it. So if I'm moving tons of data back and forth, Direct Connect is the way to go.
Precisely.
What's the other option?
The other option is AWS Site-to-Site VPN.
Okay, so that's more like a secure tunnel over the public internet.
Right, it's encrypted and secure.
But probably not as fast as Direct Connect.
It's a trade-off. Direct Connect gives you the raw speed, but VPN connections are generally more cost-effective for lower bandwidth needs.
So depending on our needs, we can choose the best option for our hybrid setup.
Exactly. And the beauty is, no matter which option you choose,
Yeah.
the Transit Gateway acts as that central point of connectivity.
So everything still flows through the Transit Gateway, even from our on-premises data center.
You got it. It's like the ultimate border control for your AWS environment.
So we've got these secure connections, either Direct Connect or VPN, bringing our on-premises traffic into AWS.
Right.
And then the Transit Gateway takes over, making sure the traffic gets to the right place.
And just like before,
Yeah.
all of this happens without ever exposing our traffic to the public internet.
So it's like we're extending that same level of security to our on-premises environments.
You got it.
Okay, this is all starting to click now.
I'm glad to hear it.
We've covered VPC endpoints, Transit Gateway, DNS, hybrid connections.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's all incredibly important for building a secure, efficient, and centralized cloud infrastructure.
And that's what we're all about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a moment.
Okay.
We've thrown a lot of technical details at our listeners today.
We have.
And while I find it all fascinating, I'm sure some people are wondering,
Yeah.
what does this actually mean for me?
Right. What's the so what?
Exactly. Why should I care
Yeah.
about centralizing my cloud resources?
That's a great question, and one we'll answer right after this quick break.
So we've talked about all these moving pieces, but let's bring it all home for our listeners out there. Why is this centralized approach so beneficial? Why should they care?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you're building a house, right? You wouldn't just scatter rooms randomly and call it a day. You need a solid foundation, a well-defined structure. That's what centralizing your cloud resources with AWS Transit Gateway does for your network. It brings order to the chaos, making everything more efficient, secure, and manageable.
Okay, so it's about more than just connecting things. It's about doing it in a way that makes sense.
Exactly. And the benefits are huge. First off, you get simplified management. Remember that sprawling mess we talked about before with VPC endpoints scattered everywhere?
Yeah, not a pretty picture.
Not at all. With TGW, you manage everything from that central hub. You define your routing rules once, and they apply to all your connected VPCs.
So less time spent configuring individual connections and more time for, well, the fun stuff.
Precisely. Plus, it reduces the risk of errors. You're not juggling a million different settings across a million different places. Everything's centralized, streamlined, easier to control.
Makes sense. So simplified management? Check.
Hmm?
What about security? That's always top of mind for me.
And it should be. Security is paramount in the cloud, and this centralized approach with TGW significantly enhances your security posture.
How so?
Well, for starters, all traffic between your VPCs and those shared services stays within the AWS ecosystem. It never has to traverse the public internet, which drastically reduces your attack surface.
No more worrying about data being intercepted or exposed in the Wild West to the public internet.
Exactly. It's like having a secure, private network for all your cloud resources.
I like the sound of that. And what about those private hosted zones, those PHZs we talked about? They play a role in security too, right?
Absolutely. PHZs add an extra layer of security by keeping your internal DNS queries within your AWS environment. It's like having a private phone book that only your trusted applications can access. No more DNS requests leaking out to the public internet, which further reduces your risk.
So we've got simplified management, we've got enhanced security. Any other benefits to this centralized approach? What about cost?
The million-dollar question. While cost savings might not always be the primary driver, centralizing your cloud resources with TGW can lead to some welcome optimizations.
Like what? Give me the details.
Well, for one, a more efficient network means you're potentially reducing your data transfer costs.
Because we're keeping traffic within the AWS ecosystem.
Exactly. Remember, some AWS services charge for data transfer between VPCs. With TGW, you can optimize those data flows and potentially minimize those transfer costs.
So we're not just talking about saving money, we're talking about spending it wisely, getting the most bang for our buck.
Precisely. And that's what makes this centralized approach so compelling. It's about aligning your cloud infrastructure with your business goals, enabling you to innovate faster, operate more securely, and potentially even save some money along the way.
It's like we're hitting all the right notes.
I like the way you think.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. VPC endpoints, Transit Gateway, DNS, hybrid connections. It's been quite the deep dive. But I hope our listeners walk away with a clear understanding of how centralizing their cloud resources can lead to a more efficient, secure, and cost-effective AWS environment.
Me too. It's all about building that solid foundation, that well-structured cloud environment that sets you up for success.
Exactly. And remember, this is just the beginning. Cloud networking is constantly evolving, so keep exploring, keep experimenting, and never stop learning. Until next time, happy networking.